So, Hare Krishna. I would like to welcome you to a really exciting interview with Radha Prabhu, who is a Vaishnavi Minister of ISKCON. We are conducting these interviews since in March we will be celebrating a 25th anniversary of Vaishnavi Ministry. So we would like to also introduce the members who have contributed to the work of the ministry through all these 25 years. So Radha Prabhu, she is a Vaishnavi, an enthusiastic devotee, a disciple of His Holiness Mukunda Goswami. She is also a lawyer, practicing lawyer with a Harvard degree, and she has been dedicating also her time in work of the ministry even before she became a minister herself. You became a minister in 2017, as I understood. I think I understood properly from the background.
Yes.
And you're also a mother, a wife, a grandmother. So about you, I mean, you contribute to the society of the Vaishnavas and the society in general, and to your family in many ways. So can you please introduce yourself also a little bit, to say something about your spiritual path, how you started, why you got involved, why were you interested in the work of the Vaishnavi Ministry, why was it so important to you? And then we will continue the conversation more to tell something.
Thank you very much, Loka Pavani Prabhu. Yes, I'm very excited to be able to speak to everyone about the Vaishnavi Ministry. I think devotees need all kinds of support, right? And having an organization for the Vaishnavis is really important for us to be able to offer as much as we can to ISKCON and to our communities. I actually didn't really want to become a devotee. When I met the devotees, I was in law school, and someone gave me Bhagavad Gita. I read the introduction and realized that Srila Prabhupada had answered the deepest questions that I had, and was very, very impressed. But the lifestyle just seemed too extreme for me. I had a plan for my life and this didn't fit in. So I was very friendly with the devotees. I was happy to go to the temple, to give donations, but I just really didn't see myself, taking up this life. Krishna, of course, is so merciful that he started closing doors and, making my plan unworkable and extremely uncomfortable. And after some time, I realized that real happiness comes from serving the Lord and his devotees, and that the real lack was something in my heart that only Krishna could fill. And I really want to give a shout out to the ladies who were at the temple where I joined, because they're the ones who supported me and taught me and encouraged me. I can't imagine that I would have become a devotee without them. And I'm not sure why women's issues have always been so important to me, but they just have been, even before I became a devotee. And when I came into ISKCON, I grew up in the 70s in America. Women were told we could do anything we wanted to, and we could do everything we wanted to, which turned out not to be true. As you pointed out, women have so many roles. And, the idea that we should do everything is really unsustainable and doesn't make us very happy. But I brought my kind of Western sensibilities to the temple, and I saw the, very clear gender roles for men and women. And I was confused, why is this necessary? And devotees told me that in order to become humble, we had to accept our roles, and that this would make us more equipped to become Krishna conscious. And quite frankly, I didn't want to stand in the back of the temple room. But if that's what it took to go back to Godhead, it seemed a very small price to pay, So I did it. And it wasn't always comfortable, but I understood that, sometimes women do have to play different roles than men do. My father's from China, and in traditional families, at least when he was growing up, there were definitely, assigned gender roles for women. And it didn't seem to me to be that huge a problem. What changed my mind was observing my daughter in the temple room. Even when she was very tiny, she was frustrated that she couldn't stand where she wanted to. She would want me to come up and stand in front of the brahmacharis so we could see the deities. And I realized that while I might be comfortable with this gender separation, it didn't work for everyone. And I was concerned because a lot of us had daughters at that time in my community. And I was concerned for these girls that, are they going to fit in? Is there going to be a place in the temple for them? Around the same time, I also met some Prabhupada disciples, some ladies who shared a lot about what the early days with Srila Prabhupada were like. And that was a big revelation for me, because the way I had been taught was that these, gender etiquette rules that we had when I joined had always been this way. And that definitely was not the case. Srila Prabhupada empowered his Vaishnavi disciples to do many things that Vaishnavis were not allowed to do when I joined. These Vaishnavis, they gave class. They were the first devotees to be trained in deity worship. They led kirtans. And interestingly, two of them actually went by themselves to a city in India to arrange a Pandal program for Srila Prabhupada. I thought that was very interesting. So the question of what roles were appropriate for women seemed to me to be much more a case of time, place, and circumstance than hard and fast. You can do this, but you can't do that kind of rules. At the same time in North America, the temple finances were changing. The people were getting married. The Sankirtan was not bringing in as much income, and a number of the men had to get jobs. So for many weeks, I would go to Srimad Bhagavatam class, and there would be one or two of the men that were giving class all the time. And I have to say, I really felt sorry for them because they weren't necessarily the people who were most inclined to give class. They were just the ones who didn't have outside jobs. And in that audience, in that community of devotees, there were a number of women who were very advanced and very scholarly. And so these men were having to do something they weren't 100% comfortable with in front of people who knew more than they did. It was very uncomfortable. And I remember hearing one of the men after a class almost crying, really choked up, and saying to another man, I don't want to do this service every day. I can't do it. I don't have time to prepare. It's not something that, I'm drawn to doing, and it's intimidating. And that again made me think, okay, why do we have these rules? Why shouldn't one of these ladies, who is an excellent speaker and knows the scripture, very well, why shouldn't she at least share this burden, right? And I think that was a big motivation in North America for women starting to take up new roles, starting to take up leadership positions, simply because there weren't enough men.
These were the 90s, or?
This was the late 80s and early 90s.
Yeah. So basically, like when Srila Prabhupada came to America, like the late 60s, beginning of 70s, then the women actually had all those roles that Prabhupada gave them. But then later on, as I understood also from the books that I read, because all the devotees were actually living in the temple, so there were a lot of brahmacharis, a lot of sannyasis, and then somehow the ladies got pushed away a little bit and turned into these roles that were actually seen in Indian society in a way, even though of course Srila Prabhupada spoke about them in the books, but somehow he would always adjust according to time, place, and circumstances. I mean, that was his mood always, but somehow it became twisted. So then we come to the 80s, where it was when you joined, right? Or the 70s, okay. And then, as you said, the end of 80s and beginning of 90s is when things started to change.
Right. And you have to keep in mind, this was not a case of instituting Indian culture in Western temples. This was a case of Western devotees who really did not understand Indian culture, picking up pieces of Indian culture and making them into, unchallengeable rules. It was not at all the same thing. You didn't have the same family structures, the same, support systems and elders to guide everyone. All of that was missing. All you had was the you can't do this rule.
Yeah. And all were so, devotees were so young.
Today, they were.
Yeah. Today we have generations. We have from little babies to really elderly people, talking about like bodily designations, but we have some, they have some certain roles in the society, and now the society is growing. So, and everything is changing when we compare it to that beginning.
Yeah. I remember hearing that Srila Prabhupada said all women should be treated as a mother, and observing this one brahmachari who was very, very strict brahmachari, very nice brahmachari. His mother called the temple. We all used the temple phone back then. She called the temple and wanted to speak to her son. So I said, okay, I'll go get him, and he I had to shout to him from the distance because you couldn't approach a brahmachari, right? And he didn't come, and I'm standing there, come on, your mother. And finally he says, tell her I don't want to talk to her. Yeah. And I thought, okay, this explains something, right? We don't have good relationships with our mothers sometimes. So when Prabhupada says, treat them like your mother, well, if your mother's someone you don't want to talk to, you don't respect, you don't like, again, that's this trying to implement, a Vedic standard in a material culture.
Yeah, that's true. So when you met these ladies and when all these things started to change, like in the beginning of the 90s, then actually, how did it happen? Were there like obstacles in changing these roles, and how did, I know that Vaishnavi Ministry was also founded in like late 90s, but there was also a path that led to the establishment of the ministry. And why ministry? Like, because like in the government you also have a lot of ministries. So, and sometimes maybe people can ask a question like, why should there be a ministry like specifically for Vaishnavis? Like, why is it so important?
I'm sure other women who were involved would maybe focus on different aspects, but from my point of view, it was the idea that women needed a voice in the decisions that affected our society and affected us on an everyday level. If you have a family and only the father is allowed to speak, it's a dysfunctional family. Radha and Krishna, male and female, there's a balance there. And our culture, our Vaishnava culture, says there's a certain etiquette around that balance, but it's not meant to stifle or silence anyone of any gender. So our leadership was all male, right? And things needed to be done for the women that weren't getting done. The first time I went to Mayapur, the ladies had the third floor of the long building, and the bathroom, the toilets didn't work, right? So you can imagine how disgusting it was in there. And it was that way the whole time I stayed there. No one fixed it, right? If it had been, men, they have access to the leaders. They can go and tell, please get this fixed. If it was a guru or a sannyasi, it would have been fixed right away. But for the ladies, it didn't happen. And a lot of that was just because when decisions were being made, there weren't ladies in the room. So in the late 90s, well, through the 90s, but kind of crystallizing in the late 90s, there was a push to have women have a voice. How are we going to get them a voice? And one of the things that happened was that Malati Prabhu was appointed to the GBC. And the other thing was the formation of the Vaishnavi Ministry. And really, I see the ministry as existing for the purpose of ensuring that Vaishnavis can engage their inclinations and talents in Krishna service. And I understand that has to be done according to time, place, and circumstance. But really, we are simply here to facilitate the Vaishnavis in ISKCON.
That's quite important because it is true that sometimes Vaishnavis they don't have a voice, and yeah, we need someone to approach, like who can also like speak in our name, but not just because we're not able to speak, but just because this, yeah, the ministry has some power because it's a part of the institution. So in that sense, it can influence others and make things better for the Vaishnavis. And can you uh, tell us maybe how do you see the improvement like from the moment the Vaishnavi ministry started with its work until today. So there's 25 years of work in the ministry of various Vaishnavis. So what has changed? How do you see it?
Well, I think at the GBC level, just having the ministry put in the minds of the leaders that, oh, yes, we also should consider the women. I think that was very valuable. One of the most important accomplishments is creating areas and avenues for Vaishnavis to work together. Honestly, I think something that, especially when we kind of adopt this modern, capitalist Western style culture, it becomes focused on the nuclear family. And the nuclear family is not really the ideal structure for, in my opinion, for life, but definitely not for, Krishna consciousness, because we need so much support from others. We need Vaishnav and Vaishnavi Sangha. We need to associate with devotees. And for Vaishnavis, I think it's really important to associate with other Vaishnavis. These are the people who can model for us, be our role models if they're older, our peers who understand, the issues that we're facing every day in a way that a man might not. And also we have a lot of resource and energy and ability that may go untapped if we don't come together. When we come together, we inspire each other. We maybe think of projects to do, or, each of us can bring a little piece to the table and we can make something very nice out of it.
Yeah, and it creates communities, such sanghas. Like, I mean, you said that it's so important for women in the community to associate because that creates communities, right?
Yeah.
Because the women they influence their families very much, and also there are like books in which the Vaishnavas described how a woman is considered to be the representation of Lakshmi Devi, and she's the one who is actually like creating a spiritual atmosphere in the home. So these are some aspects, and I mean, I did live in one community which I find very inspiring, and that is Radha Dasi community, and I really liked how there is a support between Vaishnavis and how important it is in raising kids, in practicing spiritual life. Because as, as I introduced you with many roles, all these Vaishnavis have so many roles and try to cope with them and with spiritual life, and it's quite challenging. So yeah, it has many aspects, and yeah, things like this definitely create these Vaishnavi sanghas, which are very very important, and also like this creates also like a field where we can practice the exchanges between Vaishnavas, which are intimate, like exchanges and developing friendships, which are very beneficial actually for our spiritual life. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. A couple of points that you raised, I want to expand on a little bit. There are generally differences in like the psyche of men and women. Any individual man or woman may have more or less masculine or feminine qualities, but in general, women are better at building relationships, communication, taking care of others. These are the things you need to make a strong community. So if the women are not bonding together, if they're not actively participating in your community, you're not going to have a strong community. And as far as all these different roles and how we fill them, it even when a woman does a quote unquote man's job, she may do it in a very different way than the man does it. I know from my own experience practicing law, my first job was in a big law firm that had a very masculine, aggressive, take no prisoners, never compromise kind of mentality. And I really did not enjoy working there and did not fit in well at all. I've had other experiences working in all female departments, and the atmosphere is just different. So the idea that men and women should be treated exactly the same isn't necessarily the right idea either. We are different.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's also something like in the law, like people today, when they talk about equality, they sometimes misunderstand what equality is,
Yeah.
because you can only talk about legal equality because
Right.
all these revolutions, they only brought that, and that's like the equality that exists, like in the right to the same job or to this right or to that right, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that we are actually equal. And also, if you equalize everyone, you can very much abuse them by making them so equal because not everyone is the same and they cannot function in the same situations. So that's definitely like something that people should understand and get educated.
Yeah, equal doesn't mean we're all the same. I don't want to be treated like a man. I don't want to try to be like a man. Men are already doing a very good job of that. I bring something different to the table. And there's something I've been hearing recently in terms of, racial equality, which is this idea that if you treat differently situated people the same way, that's not equality,
Yeah.
right? In other words, if you tell me that, in order to get a job, I have to be big and strong, right? And it's an equal requirement for everybody. But really, it's not equal for me, because as a woman, I'm always going to be weaker than the stronger men. So.
And it's also important, like, to emphasize this, like, for instance, like you said, that everyone can give classes because it's an expression also of Krishna consciousness. And Srila Prabhupada would many times say that actually it's very good when we hear something to repeat it. So the this giving classes also, I was listening to some lectures of Madhavananda Prabhu, and he was talking how he was saying and explaining how Krishna Katha, which is actually hearing and speaking,
Right.
it creates communities, it brings people together. So we should not exclude the members of this society, regardless of the gender, not even age, that they also participate in these discussions because it's very important for their Krishna consciousness in a way. And every one of us is a spirit soul, so we can serve and we can express our creativity and service through all these things that we have that Srila Prabhupada gave us. And actually, it has nothing to do with the notion of equality or non-equality. It's just like the service that we do. We actually serve our spiritual masters. So, wouldn't you say that in that connection, it was also a misconception to put these questions of equality in this space of actually spirituality?
And that's something that ISKCON still wrestles with and probably will for a while. We come from a traditional worldview, right? Varnashram Dharma, very defined roles for different genders, different varnas, different ashrams, right? But Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was a revolutionary, right? He's to some extent blowing up Varnashram Dharma and saying everyone has access to bhakti, to Krishna. Everyone qualifies for the mercy. So we always have to balance this, keeping the society stable and in the mode of goodness so that we have our best chance to seek bhakti, to practice bhakti yoga, but at the same time remembering that, Krishna consciousness is for everyone, right? And this whole idea of speaking Krishna Katha, I think this is one of the areas where women can really make a big contribution. And only a very small part of that contribution is by giving formal classes in the temple. I think it's important to have a wide variety of people giving classes in the temple because you get a wide variety of perspectives and a wide variety of realizations. That's very important, both for building community, but also for our own spiritual growth. But the truth is, most of the devotees in a community are never going to want to give class in the temple. You know, they will not do it, male or female, right? So how do we get these exchanges of, you know, Krishna Katha? How do we get those going, right? And you're right, it is for learning, it is very important to speak or write, which is another form of speaking, right? Another form of Katha, but to speak our realizations. My husband and I have had the good fortune to do home programs and congregational preaching throughout our marriage. And one of the things we focus on is, you know, discussion circles where everybody contributes. It's amazing the very deep, potent realizations you get from devotees who otherwise would not have spoken up in public, you know. So it's, you know, these are the kinds of things Vaishnavis can organize. It doesn't have to be big and formal and in the institution. Our homes are a wonderful place for building community, for exchanging realizations, you know, and for creating, as you said, creating this atmosphere of spirituality in the home. Quite frankly, no matter how wonderful our temples are, no matter how realized the people who live in them and serve in them are, if we don't create spirituality in our own homes, we're going to struggle, you know.
I also wanted to ask a question because, you know, people have a lot of misconceptions. So they would say like, oh, this Vaishnavi ministry actually was founded and established in North America. So it's like a it was established because of the Western way of life, and it's very much influenced by feminism. So, I mean, I would disagree with that because sometimes it seems that if you talk about women issues, automatically you are a feminist. So maybe you would like to say something about that.
Yeah, you know, it is important to realize that people will use words to silence those who don't have power, right? That's been true for women, you know, for all of history. And in ISKCON, one of the tools that is used to silence women is feminism. So quite frankly, I don't believe that anybody who accepts Srila Prabhupada's teachings could possibly be a feminist, because you have to accept his instruction that women need to be protected. And no self-respecting feminist is ever going to agree with that. It's not feminism, you know, that drives the desire to serve the Vaishnavis in ISKCON. You know, as far as the Vaishnavi ministry coming, you know, largely from devotees in the West, part of that is because they were the original disciples. They are the ones who had the most contact with Srila Prabhupada, and they are the ones who hold that history of how he engaged Vaishnavis in service. And part of it is that, as I said before, in America, the Sankirtan income was disrupted. So the male devotees, as I said, had to go out and get jobs. And so many times the women were the ones who had to keep things running while the men were out earning money. And it quickly became apparent that, you know, it would be foolish not to use their talents and abilities, especially when they were needed. At the same time, having said all that, I do want to say that what it looks like to empower a Vaishnavi, you know, the actual mechanics of it, may be very different in California than in, you know, Vrindavan, you know, and there may be very good reasons for that. It's not the place of the Vaishnavi ministry to tell anyone how they need to engage women. You know, our role is to help the women figure out how they can best be engaged within their own communities.
Yeah, that's wonderful, like what you just said. And while you were speaking, I was also thinking how Srila Prabhupada was a revolutionist. I mean, I can say it like that because, as you said, that this all came from the first disciples, And these first disciples were all Westerners. Like even the concept of a white man wearing a Brahmana thread and coming to India was totally like, I mean, not expected in a way. Of course, it was in the prophecy of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, they all saw this vision and so on. But it was also a strange thing because we were coming from the countries of Mlechas and Yavanas. So, and we can also see, like, when we even think about these topics of how there were certain changes in the movement, like they were there because of time, place, and circumstances, right? So even Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he uh, he established the sannyasa order,
Right.
our movement, which was not existing before. So he also would wear also sometimes Western clothes. Srila Prabhupada changed very drastically the concept of women receiving a Brahmana initiation because he gave them Gayatri mantras. So all this was like just pointing at what you said in this conversation, how Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted to distribute the mercy to everyone. So they were like his representatives who were giving it in that way.
Yeah.
So this all actually proves all the things that you were saying. Yeah. And I think also it's important that devotees, when they want to discuss like these topics, that they really get immersed in like Srila Prabhupada's books and his teachings and try to see it from various perspectives, and also to get to know like this historical background of everything, to know like why these things are the way they are.
Yeah. Sometimes we approach Srila Prabhupada the way the blind men approached the elephant, right? They each get one little piece of the elephant and they say, it has, a big, thick trunk. No, it has this long, stringy rope. It has, and we do that with Srila Prabhupada. We lift out one thing that he said or one thing that he did, and we say, that's Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada is all of it. Srila Prabhupada said women have to be protected, they should go from their father to their husband to their son. And he also put women on the altar to worship the deities, right? Both of those things are Srila Prabhupada. I know for myself, looking at women's issues in ISKCON, I kind of started because, I grew up in the West with, this idea of all of these restrictions and etiquettes and all of this stuff is just really not important in bhakti yoga, right? And over the years of observing how things can go sideways in a community, of hearing from senior devotees, of more carefully reading Prabhupada's books and letters, I've come to the realization that no, Prabhupada's point is that men and women are different and that there has to be some recognition of that built into a society. You can't ignore that fact, but at the same time, you also have to give everyone access to service and access to bhakti. It's intellectually easier to say, Prabhupada wanted us to do this, Prabhupada wanted us to do that. The truth is, Prabhupada wanted us to do this and that and use our mature realizations to figure out when it's time for this and when it's time for that. That's a much harder task.
Yeah, that's true. And even if you were a liberal or a very conservative member of the society, you can always have support for your arguments from Prabhupada's books, and then you can just
Exactly.
throw the ball aside. But everyone is in a way right, and there is a need for everyone in the society, and like this, we have a right to choose like how we live our lives, and also like according to where we are, because even though there is varna ashram dharma, but it was also, the point was at creating Devi varna ashram dharma,
Right.
the society where people take the roles according to their qualities and yeah, their interests, and then they perform it. and then how they develop in a certain society. Yeah, and also like Srila Prabhupada, many times he wanted to develop agricultural communities, but the fact still remains that the devotees are in the cities. So in that sense, they have to function also there. So there has to be some kind of a assimilation and like to the conditions in which we live.
I think the important thing is to realize that bhakti yoga is a voluntary process, right? Whenever we are in the position of telling someone they have to be something or they can't be something, we need to be very cautious, right? It's not that we should force by rules, everyone to become part of the varnashram system. If you don't choose one of these, you can be a Brahmin, you can be a Kshatriya, you can be an agriculturist, or you can be a laborer. That's all. You can't choose anything else, right? How many people are going to want to do that? How many people are going to come to this movement and say, yes, sign me up? I I will not take any kind of position that has anything, higher than a laborer job because I'm a Shudra. It doesn't work like that. What we have to do is help build a nice society, build healthy, strong, loving communities. People will come into that, and then people naturally over time sort themselves into different roles because we do have different talents and inclinations. But it's not something we're supposed to do by force.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Voluntary. I mean,
Yeah.
Krishna doesn't want to force us at anything. Like it's our free will and development of love that we want to do something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. And maybe the last question that I would like to ask is, how do you see the future for the Vaishnavis and also for the Vaishnavi ministry, like the role of the Vaishnavi ministry in the future of ISKCON communities?
The most exciting thing that's happening in the Vaishnavi ministry right now is the work that the regional ministers are doing in their areas. We have some fantastic, amazing, deeply Krishna conscious Vaishnavis who are organizing their areas so that they are building networks for Vaishnavis, for Sangha, for Shastra study, for, just support. They're introducing all kinds of resources right now, especially online, where Vaishnavis can hear from each other, where, they can address issues like motherhood, like filling all these different roles, like, taking care of ourselves as women. All of these things can be addressed. And I, for the first few years of my service as the Vaishnavi minister, my focus was just on finding women, who had something to offer and a desire to offer it. And I get so many compliments and thank yous for work that is done actually by these amazing women. And I want to say that my contribution is that I have been able to empower these ladies. That's what I feel like I have accomplished, right? That's my offering to Srila Prabhupada. I've been able to empower these ladies, and these women are just amazing. And I know, just from my own little experience, there are so many women in our movement who are able to do so much, who have so much to offer. And, just like Srila Prabhupada, Lord Chaitanya, they become so enthusiastic, so happy when we facilitate the devotee service, when we facilitate the service of the devotees around us. So, for Vaishnavis to come together and facilitate each other's service, to support each other, is so pleasing to Srila Prabhupada. And that's what I hope and I know that the Vaishnavi ministry will do and continue to do in bigger and better ways.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. I saw some of the initiatives actually all over the world from various Vaishnavis, and it's really wonderful. And the Sadhvi Sangha also that has like a lot of members. I forgot how many, but
Yeah.
with these conversations, especially with Prabhupada's disciples. And I loved the book that you published, The Bond of Love,
Mhm.
where we can actually read the experiences of Prabhupada's disciples that they had in relationship to Srila Prabhupada.
Yeah.
And it's also very inspiring because then, because the ladies, they sometimes think that, like, oh, I cannot have such a close relationship with my spiritual master because, it's always a bodily designation that sometimes stops us. But when you read all these experiences of the Vaishnavis, then you can see that actually it just goes beyond this bodily designation, and it's much more, and it's also mystical, and you're very, very much connected in so many ways. So
Yeah. Yeah. Malati Prabhu actually spent over 10 years interviewing all of the Vaishnavi disciples of Srila Prabhupada for that book. It is, a huge accomplishment, and quite frankly, I think something that is going to benefit generations of devotees, hundreds of generations of devotees, to have all of that nectar compiled in that volume. Yeah.
yeah, it's actually very important because as time goes by, Prabhupada's disciples are leaving the
Yeah.
planet. Sometimes I'm wondering, like, oh my God, what will be like in 50, 100 years, because as time goes by, some things just get lost. So all these recordings in writing and in audio and video are so important for us to get this inspiration and also to see how things function. And yeah, I just wanted to say how I also find inspiring very much Yamuna Devi Dasi's legacy and the book that Dinatarini Prabhu wrote. It's, I mean, a lot of Vaishnavis in my community and in European community where I am here connected. They appreciate it very much and find it
Yeah.
so inspiring. So
Yeah.
we are
It
very
is.
grateful.
It is. And I just want to say too that when we're with these devotees, we don't always appreciate what they have to offer, and then someone writes a biography or they write something and we realize, oh, wow, that's actually an exalted saint. I've been speaking with an exalted saint, and there are still exalted saints in our communities. So, we don't overlook, the sweet realizations, the nectar, from the people around you. Um, I think if we, as a movement, if we deeply meditate on the desires of Srila Prabhupada, if we really are bringing our hearts to him and saying, please guide us, and if we really value each other, I think we will stay on track. The problems come when, somebody wants to put words in Prabhupada's mouth, or starts thinking that the devotees are an impediment, or, that's when things go sideways.
Yes. I like what you just now mentioned, how we should value each other. And
Yeah.
I can also say, but this is from my experience, like before I would expect, that everyone is like in the books, but what Prabhupada would say that utopia is actually impersonalistic
Yeah.
because in the spiritual world, everyone is so different. And actually, Krishna relishes these differences in these relationships that he has with others. So even though sometimes we might not understand other people or their concept or their
Right.
tastes, still they're there and they serve Krishna and they give him pleasure with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone in our communities wants to please Prabhupada. We might disagree, on what that looks like, but we all want that. We are all family to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. It's
Well,
very
thank you.
inspiring. And also, like, if Vaishnavis, for instance, become inspired by listening to all these interviews and videos, they can always contact, right, Vaishnavi Ministry and ask.
Yeah, absolutely. VaishnaviMinistry.org.
Yeah, webpage, Facebook, and so on. So thank you very much for your
Oh, thank you, Prabhu.
and interview. And yeah, I wish you a lot of success in all your services. And we hope that all of us can contribute uh, the best we can in the service of the Vaishnavas, Srila Prabhupada and Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.